And Rick, it's time for a little segment. Let me check my note called Inside the War Room with Rick. You're Rick. We're going to go inside the war room. You spent the last 10 years as the Vikings general manager. So, and we talked about this a little bit last night. I was quizzing you. Not even knowing we're going to talk about it today. But here's the thing. What are you doing? Let's start Wednesday night, 24 hours before the draft. Is the hay in the barn, or are you still making last-minute adjustments?
Well, first, I appreciate Debo actually giving really good instructions, very detailed instructions. Rick, do not filibuster. Let Ryan break it up with questions.
Okay.
So I'll try to follow this script that Debo put together.
We shall see.
So Wednesday night was our kind of celebration night. So I would take the whole staff out to a really nice dinner.
Yeah.
And what we would do, just to have fun, it was all the assistants, the interns, and we would go around the room and said, okay, we have pick number 20. Who are you taking?
Oh, you would do that?
Yeah, and just and then if someone made something, then my sarcasm, which I'm
get out of here.
Yeah, I can be sarcastic at times. Would go ahead and give a little enlightenment on what I felt why that pick was probably wrong.
The thing is, I wonder what the hit rate was for people who actually made the right pick, and you gave them a hard time about it.
I promoted them.
Oh, there you go. That means I'm getting a promotion?
No.
Okay. All right, so Thursday morning comes. You're typically an early morning riser. You're probably out walking the dogs at 6 a.m. What are you doing from 6 until what time do you get to the facility?
Yeah, no, I would get up early in the morning and do my normal routine that I still do to this day is walk the dogs for an hour.
How long does it take to get the hair ready?
The hair was like a 2-hour session, but that was before the draft.
Okay.
But I would go to breakfast with my wife, Michelle, every draft morning on Thursday. And if we had a good draft the year before, we would go to the same restaurant. If we had a bad draft, we would change up restaurants. And then I would kind of get back and relax a little bit. There's nothing else to discuss. We've discussed everything we possibly could. So I'd have everybody come in about 3 or 4 o'clock. The scouts come in. They had a nice catered dinner for us. But the one thing that would happen is around 3:30, that's when the phone calls start coming in, especially if you're picking higher in the draft. Mm-hmm. Later in the draft, you will get no phone calls. You're like the Maytag repairman there, just waiting for the clock to start. But when you're up there that high, there's a lot of phone calls. A lot of phone calls before, but it really starts to get down to as we would say, nut crunching time.
Yeah.
And then we would have to definitely start finalizing some plans on potential trades.
And we just talked to Aditi, and she talked about all the smoke screens going on. You didn't really pay attention to the smoke screens. You said you would read what was coming out the day of the draft, but it didn't affect your moment-to-moment decision-making, right?
It didn't affect our moment-to-moment decision-making, but I loved reading all the
nonsense.
Because I would put us – I was like, okay – Ryan Wilson had 8 trades in the first round in his latest mock draft. Yeah. So let's just go through that scenario. What would we do in this situation? Or Pete Prisco, oh no, never mind, we never paid attention to what Pete said. But we would go back and forth on just different scenarios. I'd like to read through and I would combine different scenarios, knowing that that's probably not going to happen. But what if it did by some reason?
Yeah.
And then we would put ourselves in those scenarios and then go from there. Not on draft day, not today. We would do this all during the week prior.
Oh, it's funny that you mentioned Pete Prisco because I think producer Stryker and producer Debo put their heads together to make fun of you and I both. Mostly you because you actually have a lot of experience in the NFL. Look at that. Look what they did to us. So Delphonic tweeted this out. Got the graphic, Pete. Sorry, Rick. So that's me, Brinson Breach, and poor Rick is down there with us. As Pete, who has never been over 5'4" in his life, is suddenly 6'3", is teaching us the game. How does that make you feel?
Boy, I feel enlightened, and I can't wait to give some opinions on tonight's picks as we go through them.
You look like you were like a goody two-shoes in school, too, with that headshot there. All right, so we talked about Debo and Stryker, our 2 producers here, and they have some questions. How do you stay up so late? Because people might not know. You go to bed typically at 9:30 on non-draft nights. How do you manage to stay up to close to midnight?
Yeah, well, that's a lot of coffee. That was a big, huge nap from 12 to 2 before I came in. And then the other thing, though, is especially if you're picking that late, your adrenaline's flowing. So, and then it's hard to go to sleep when you get home after the draft. And we could talk about that a little bit. But it's a lot of coffee, then it's a lot of anticipation, and it's a lot of adrenaline flowing. So that would usually keep me up.
Typically, you're pretty calm when things start to go sideways. You did say one time, there's only one time you recall that you got angry in the draft room, and that's
Yes.
when a team jumped you for a player. Is that what happened? Something
No, no.
Oh.
We had an agreement, and then we
Oh.
called back and
Oh, I
said,
see.
call into the league. We have this agreement, and then they reneged on the agreement. And then I took my squeeze ball and threw it against the wall, and then we moved on in life.
You moved on. Okay, and then you talked about once you get home on Thursday night, your head's racing because of all the things that happened. Are you getting phone calls then if you have an
No.
early pick, or that doesn't happen until Friday morning?
No. On Thursday night, actually, we would meet right after the draft, and then we would look what's the best available on the board. I would tell them, sleep on it. We're going to have a meeting maybe 3 or 4 hours before the draft starts on Friday. A lot of phone calls, maybe some things that you're hearing out there, some buddies that you're talking to. Especially if you're at the top of the second round, that's like golden. Every day that you have, like on Saturday, the top of the fourth round, and having that number 1 or number 2 overall pick, those are golden picks where you can do a lot of manipulating and trading during that time. But we would come back. We knew we had kind of a game plan. Now you know what happened on the first round. Now we can go ahead and adjust our board a little bit, what's going to happen the next day.
I don't know how often this happens, but are there situations where guys you had graded as first rounders are hanging around at the top of day 2, and then you're doing some math on whether it's worth the?
Yeah, most of the time everybody's first round is going
Okay.
to be the same. But this year I think it's going to be very intriguing because this is such a top-heavy draft. So they're going to be first-round talented players there sitting on Friday. That's when it gets exciting because there's going to be teams trying to manipulate, trying to get up to get maybe a guy they covet.
All right, this is from producer Debo. How bad does your attitude get by 10 p.m.? Because you do get squirrely as the sun sets. So what do you expect you're going to be like at 10 p.m. tonight?
Oh, I would be so excited that we get to stay up past 9:30.
I don't know about
Okay, it's draft. It's once a year. So this is a time we get an opportunity to talk about all this. This is a time you just spent the last 11 months getting ready
Yeah.
for these next 3 days. So that's the exciting part of it.
Again, producer Debo weighs in. And you're a big Hallmark guy. You and our buddy
Love
Charles
Hallmark,
Davis.
yeah.
It's the first sign that you're a serial killer. But here we go. Is Hallmark playing on any of the televisions in the draft room?
Not in the draft room, but after Sunday,
That's how you
I go
unwind?
home Sunday afternoon. I don't want to hear about football or anything. I watched Hallmark movies from 3 in the afternoon until I went to bed Sunday night.
At 6 p.m. All right. Debo wants to know also, and I think Stryker asked this one, what's the best part of the night? Because that is, do you ever come out of the draft in the first round upset, or are you always happy because there's going to be someone there?
Yeah, well, you're on camera, so you have to be happy.
That's right, yeah.
So I don't think anyone I've ever seen since this draft coverage, and they have the cameras in the draft rooms, that anyone's sitting there mad, except Tom Donahue that one time when Howie Roseman went over to try to high-five him a few years
I
ago.
think there's an Eagles situation with Milton Williams. They wanted maybe Akeem McNeil, who ended up in Detroit. That was an interesting moment because that's something, to your point, you don't see very often. I think they wanted McNeil over Milton, and I may be misremembering, but that was, to your point, doesn't happen very often.
No, and most of the time you have a game plan. You see what you know who you're going to take. You know if you potentially move up or move down. You've been through the worst case scenario. So I would always say this is our worst case scenario, okay? But we're going to be excited about this worst case scenario because I think this player is going to come in and help us win ball games.
So that's the second half of the question. The worst part is that maybe you don't get the guy in the tier that you're talking about, but there's always a backup plan when you're picking top 32.
Yeah, and I guess the most exciting part is it's finally here, too.
Yeah.
Because like we said earlier, you did 10, 11 months of work to get to this 1, 2, 3 days that you have in the draft to help improve your ball club. The other thing, it's the last time that you can make major decisions to have an impact on your roster, because after the draft, you may do a trade here or there, but this is the last time you can have an impact on filling your needs for the 2024 season.
All right, the most important question after we've been together 18 months now, pretty steady relationship. Do you miss it, Rick?
I do. I got to admit, it's the thrill of being there and the thrill of making decisions. And I always really, really got a high out of being able to make those split-second decisions, whether it was a trade, whether it was a player, whether to move up, whether to move down. That stuff it's just like a coach or a player on game day. That's hard to replicate. That's the scouts and GM's game day these next 3 days.
You might not be able to open up a computer or drink a cup of coffee without spilling yourself, but you're incredibly competitive, and you are somehow calm under pressure, which is funny given the way you yell and scream at me. All right,